Frank, we got all pissed at each other this week.
We did.
Started arguing, a little snippy via Slack. Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome back to the Net Gains podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Roger Parent. I'm an ex-CEO, former pro athlete, and father of three.
What were you a former pro athlete in?
I mean, I reached a much higher level of volleyball than you. So if you're a pro athlete, then I was a pro athlete.
I am your other host, Frank Field. I compete on the AVP Beach Volleyball Tour while also working for one of Roger's companies.
Frank, we got all pissed at each other this week.
We did.
Started arguing, a little snippy via Slack. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So it was a pretty good inspiration for the episode this week. So, I mean, last week's Roger got really sick, and so we talked about his setback, and then we had a little blow up as well. So we decided to talk about that in the podcast. So this might just turn into us talking about our lives. But yeah, you and I typically do have a blow up or like a really tough conversation once a year or like twice a year. But it's funny, it actually always happens right around this time. It's always in spring. It's been like, I think 3 years in a row we've had a really tough conversation in spring.
I'm just going to say it's because that's when you start volleyball season.
Yes, you're right. But I also like, side note, I get really like antsy right before the season starts. I'm like, I've been doing all this training and like I'm ready to go, and I'm just not competing yet. There's like a 3-week span before you compete, and so I'm just chomping at the bit, and I want to like attack, you know. I guess I take it out on you, so sorry for that.
I mean, I'm the same way about like seasonal depression or whatever. Like after 6 months of freaking cold, rainy, miserable, cloudy weather and not seeing the sun, because I live in Connecticut, I get super frustrated this time of year too, where I'm just like, come on, like how am I'm literally supposed to get like another inch of snow tomorrow. And it's like, how is that even possible? It's freaking April.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So like we were being snippy at each other over Slack. We had some, actually, ironically, I think similar ideas about the podcast, but they weren't being vocalized in the right way. So, we had to have a tough conversation. We hopped on a call Monday, I think, cleared it all out, and we're actually kind of on the same page with all this. Recorded an episode the next day, and it was our best one in a while. So, yeah, feeling good about it, but the tough conversation had to be had, and it would have gotten way worse and way more toxic if we hadn't just jumped on a call.
Yeah, I mean, we were both busy feeling the weight of having to record an hour-long podcast and outlining and all the editing that goes into that and all the clipping and publishing on various platforms and all, like, it's just a very weighty process. We have other people involved in that process and with different ideas and conflicting opinions and having to debate out ideas, good from bad, and prioritize episodes. And I think it got to the point where you and I were both like, it was not what we set out to create, which was you and I love talking about mindset and these topics. And I think it turned into like way too much of a production. Mm-hmm. And so by stripping it all down and focusing on these very, very tight themes, I had probably the most fun I've had recording the last episode 10.
Yes, episode 10. Mm-hmm. We're recording this before it's come out, so I wonder if episode 10 was great. We'll see if it gets some responses in the view counts, but it felt good on our side, so that's all we can do. I think the big takeaway too, like we're going to get into some more pro strats in a little bit, but I think the biggest one out of our conversation was doing an actual call versus talking via text, because like Slack messages or text messages can be misconstrued and like the meaning behind them just all scrambled up. So I think that was like the biggest thing is we had to clear up the text messaging and then just talk face to face, right? And then, I found out, like, I thought you were being an a-hole to me over messages. And You're like, no, dude, I was joking the whole time. And I'm like, well, that really pissed me off, you know? So, but by kind of like airing that out together, I think doing it face to face is really the only way you can do a conversation like that.
It started with, I think like you were expressing frustration around scheduling, like when can we record the next episode? And it's like, well, when can Roger do it? When can Frank do it? And we were just like, can we move it to this day? Can we move it to that day? And I think it was just some frustration around that. And what we decided was by stripping it all down, we're able to be much more flexible because we can record episodes in fifth of the time, right? And we jumped. I think it was I could sense the frustration through Slack, and then I just opened up a Zoom link, like, all right, get in here, and then we were able to hash it out. But I want to know what was going on in your mind, because like you came in, you were like, I'm feeling pissed, but you handled it in a really interesting way. Where like you didn't like jump on the call and start like yelling or anything like that. You were like, I'm feeling this way, and like I feel like I'm not sure what to do next. And like, what was going through your mind and like how to approach that conversation? Or did you just jump in and just kind of like say what was on your mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we both have a way of handling those conversations in a very neutral way. So, neither of us are super confrontational unless it's on the court together. But I think we both handle that in a very neutral way. So I came into it wanting to express a little bit of frustration, but knowing that we could work through it. So, I mean, you also opened up right away. Like you apologized off the bat, like, hey, like my bad. I didn't mean for these messages to get taken a certain way. And you could tell that I was upset too. So like, I think I was able to be calmer on the call because you opened yourself up to apologizing right away.
Yeah, that's like probably the number one tip in how to have a tough conversation is to approach that conversation with something you're doing wrong first. Like start off with that, because tough conversations inherently have ego and perceptions involved. And you have, I consider it like two barriers, these two brick walls up. They're very natural human emotions to experience, where it's like, if I have my barrier up, your barrier is going to remain up. And what ends up happening is both sides waiting for the other to lower their barrier before they're willing to lower it themselves. Like I'm waiting for you to lower yours before I'm able to lower my own. And so that's something that like, I knew I was going into a tough conversation. It was like, if I can think about what I could have improved in this situation and bring that to the table right up front, it just like cuts through the frustration. And it's like, oh, okay, like Roger's not like yelling back at me. He's listening and he's hearing and he's apologizing too. And then it like opens up, then you're willing to drop your barriers, which you did. And we could actually have a vulnerable conversation about like, what can each person do better?
And I think the biggest part of that, thinking back on it now, was you not having an ego in that situation, because you easily could have come into that call like, dude, I'm doing X, Y, Z. And like, you could have, that would have just ruined the entire call if you had come into it with an ego about the stuff you were doing, because I was coming into it with an ego about the stuff I was doing 100%. So yeah. I think by you coming in without the ego, it allowed me to drop my ego as well. And we figured it out together.
Yeah. And then it's like, it's not what you say, but how you say it, right? Like I, even though you came into it like hot, you never once talked to me in like a.
I came in a little hot.
Yeah. Yeah. Not physically hot, Frank.
Well, listen.
You never once like you still approached it with a level of respect of like, hey, it's one thing to say, you're pissing me off, stop acting like that, or don't do this, versus I'm feeling pretty pissed off right now. I'm feeling very frustrated. And like, let's work through it. It still felt like a collaborative thing, even while you were emotional. You know what I mean? Like, I think you still approached it from a perspective of like mutual respect.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I think that respect is earned. You know, like you've obviously earned my respect. I like to think that I've earned yours. So we're able to approach that conversation with that mutual thing still together with us, right? So we didn't lose that respect. We just had some creative differences to solve. So I don't know, but how would you? You've probably been in a lot of tough conversations throughout your career. So when you are entering that with someone who maybe you don't have respect for, or I guess I'll rephrase that better. Like, how do you enter a conversation and gain the mutual respect to work together through it?
I think it's just about being. It's about, so like I said, entering the conversation with something you can do better. Being empathetic or understanding to what they may be experiencing, and asking questions. So I think that like questions show that you're listening and you're trying to get to the bottom of how they're feeling as opposed to just how you're feeling. And then the third thing I'd say is just like being clear, right? Like, I've unfortunately had to terminate an employee before. And it's like, you don't want to enter a tough conversation like that and dance around it. It's like, you have to just address it right up front. Like, hey, this conversation is going to suck. We're going to be letting go of you today, blah, blah, blah. I want to walk through the reasons why. I'm willing to answer any questions you have. We're going to take good care of you. And like, this is going to be tough, but like, I'm going to hook you up with a recruiter and blah, blah, blah. And like showing empathy. And then you're talking to that person. We're going to do a severance. We're going to do this. And like, you really take care of this person. And you're being empathetic and you're saying, what questions do you have for me? How can we and not knowing how that person is going to respond, but at least I'm being clear. I'm saying, trying to bring up a couple points of like why we believe that didn't work, and then expressing empathy throughout that conversation. Because those types of conversations just need to exist in life, as tough as they can be.
I think that's a really good call out. The being clear on what you want, right? Because if you're just expressing emotions and anger or whatever, just for the purpose of doing it with no goal or outcome, it's probably not going to have a good resolution for you.
Yeah, and you said in our tough conversation, you said like, I want to keep the podcast going. I'm really passionate about this. I want to figure this out. Like, your intentions were clear, and my intentions were, my clarity to you was, I love it too, but I can't spend 10 hours a week on it. Like, I'm just not interested in it, in editing and outlining and all of this. I just want to jump on talk to a friend about this subject that we're really passionate in and continue to learn from each other. And that's, I think, what we're doing.
Yeah. So having clear outcomes is huge. I think another big one is breathing. Like if you are not in control of your breathing during these conversations, it allows, if you get in the science of it, your amygdala is kind of the emotional response center in your brain. And when you're not in control of your breath, like shallow breath, or you're breathing in your chest, it simulates panic response, and that can make your amygdala shrink, which makes you react differently in these conversations. So like a good time to do that is when you are in the listening phase of a tough conversation. For example, I was listening, I was letting you go through your piece, and I took that moment to take some deep breaths on my own, and that allowed me to stay calm and listen and actually, follow your point of view.
And I would also say that within a tough conversation, if there is a self-identification ability of saying, I am emotional right now, I'm getting pissed off, or I'm feeling this sort of way, it is totally okay to say, I need to digest this a little bit. Can I take a little bit of time to process? And then can we circle back? Right. Mm-hmm. And I see this in like business all the time. Like, hey, I need to like really think on this for a little bit, and let's reconvene tomorrow. I see this in my personal relationship. Like, my wife and I sometimes just need to be like, let's give it a little bit, think about it, and then let's talk in an hour. And that like is always helpful, because then you just come back and you're like, oh, I thought about it this way during that time, and I was able to process the feedback you were giving me in a non-defensive way. And then we can really work on the meat and potatoes of the issue.
Yeah, I think that one is especially useful if you don't necessarily, how do you define it? Like having the outcome, like the clear intent, the clear outcome you want from that conversation. Because sometimes we just enter these conversations and don't know what we want to get out of them. And then, we're just expressing these things. We don't realize kind of what they mean. So by taking that break, personally, I'm this way a lot. I need to go take a walk. I need to think about it, clear my thoughts, and then understand the outcome that I want. And at that point, the conversation becomes a lot better.
Now, how do you feel about having a tough conversation where you're at an impasse, where you're like, let's just say that I wanted to take the podcast in one really different direction from what you wanted. We were having a tough conversation and we felt like we were just stuck. Because I think people will ask, like, well, it's easy to have a tough conversation when you can emotionally get through it and you both like can end up agreeing. Because I think both of us said, like, oh, the answer to our solution to our problem is to pivot the podcast, make it shorter form, get back to what we love doing, and really focus in. But what if we really did have very different visions? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Good question. I think sometimes there has to be a winner and a loser at some point, right? And I'm curious if you agree or disagree on this, but like if the outcome that I wanted was to continue the podcast, but you were only going to do it a certain way, I might have been like, I'm willing to take a loss on this to keep doing what I want to do. If we had creative differences on that, So I think we've actually had this in our relationship where sometimes one of us just has to say, okay, that's what you want to do. That's how we'll do it. And in order to keep both parties going in the same direction, one party has to maybe sacrifice a little bit.
And I get that's a good point. It really does depend on the type of decision or conflict too. Like, for example, my wife wanted to have a third child and I didn't. Well, like, really, I kind of just get my way because, like, whoever says you need both consenting parents to have another child, to bring another human into the world, right? And so it's like, yeah, that's like that type of decision has a clear winner, quote unquote, that gets to sort of decide. We did end up having a third child, by the way, but I wanted to be fully on board before we pulled that trigger. And so, yeah. And then it also, there's a lot of context there about like, you're trying to basically negotiate. Like you're going through like a negotiation in a way where you're trying to get to the fairest place you can, understanding that it'll never be 50-50. No relationship ever is 50-50.
Yeah, and there'll be probably times where you can be the higher percentage of that 50-50. You might win some, you might lose some. But again, like as long as both parties are going in the same direction and you have the same end goal in mind, which is staying together and, obviously being a family. So there might just be wins and losses along the way. And it usually evens out, I think, about to 50-50.
Yeah. Yeah. So I still think though that the biggest thing in handling a tough conversation is really keeping your emotions in check and listening. Like, don't interrupt. During the conversation, if you can think about what you could have done better and just articulate what you're looking for from the other party, but be able to talk about what you could do better and give this time and space to listen, I think the conversations, you can almost notice it in an argument. It's just like those barriers, and you can feel the tide turning when a conversation starts to go well, and you're like, you could just feel all the barriers dropping. And so you could just feel the energy like shift like that.
It's like a breath of fresh air. You can finally take a breath,
Yeah. And then all of a sudden the conversation's like, oh yeah, I could have done better here too. Oh yeah, I could have done better here too. And there's all these like admissions of guilt that both parties were holding back, like an army of ego that they're like afraid to release because they don't want to be vulnerable in front of the other person because they're so defensive. That if you can muster up the strength to be vulnerable and to give up and say like, I could have done this better, what you find is that you always get that reciprocation. It's like you always get that like, yeah, I could have done this better too, actually. It's not just you. And it's like, oh, wow, like that worked well. And then the connection gets deeper.
Okay, so let's wrap up here. So let's just go over a few of those keys that we talked about, just kind of summarize. Coming in with clear goals, super important. You need to know what you want out of the conversation, or you're just expressing emotions haphazardly. I suggested breathing, especially during the listening phase of that conversation. Take a breath. Make sure you're in control of your emotions during it. 3, you said come in with something that you're doing wrong to drop your barrier and be vulnerable. What else are we at?
It's not in what you say, but how you say it. Number 4, which is the tone and presentation matters. It's a very different thing to say, you're not good at this versus I feel like I'm not getting heard in this thing. Or I'm not feeling heard in this area.
Yeah, I think that phrase right there is super important. The I'm feeling like X. It lets the other person know how you're feeling and kind of the emotions behind the words you're saying.
Yep. Number 5, taking a break if need be within the conversation. You know, nobody's life is so unbelievably important that they need to just, finish this conversation right now because they don't have time for it later. Like, come on, take a deep breath, take some space if you need it. And then I would just say, always end a tough conversation with a clear summary of what you have concluded, and make sure it's in writing. Like, okay, we both agree that we decided to do this, right? So you don't have to revisit that conversation later on of like, oh no, I swear we said this or said we said that. It's always good to just be like my wife and I have a tough conversation. We decide on some parenting direction with the kids. I'll summarize it and send it in a text message to her.
Signed contract.
And then yeah. It's just like a little thing, like we both are agreeing. There's just something powerful about a little, we both now know that we can go back and reference something, and we both agree when we're putting it in writing that we agree. And then just taking action, like feeling the action of the other party afterward.
Sweet. Love it. Look at that. Concise. You want to take us through your motivational quote?
Yeah, we both have motivational quotes today. Mine is from Douglas Stone. It is, difficult conversations are almost never about getting the facts right. They are about conflicting perceptions, interpretations, and values. And that quote really spoke to me because I think so many times it was like there's lies, damn lies, and then statistics is another quote where it's like the same thing. Like a lot of times it's not that you disagree about the facts. It's that you're interpreting the facts differently, or your perception of reality is different. And so that's sort of what you're debating. So yeah, it's like about breaking those barriers down.
My quote is actually from a client today. I was on with Features. Shout out to the whole Features team. #1 running socks in America. Check them out, features.com.
They're the best, man. They're such a great group of people.
Oh my God, amazing. They're amazing. But we're just like chatting to start the call, and I was like, oh yeah, Roger and I are going to have a conversation on the pod about tough conversations. And one of them over there, Alexis, shout out Alexis, she said, I was just listening to a podcast on that, and one of their things was a quote that the toughest conversations are the ones that aren't had. So I will steal that from whatever she got it from and from her, because kind of leaving those things under the surface just makes them way worse. And instead of getting them out in the air, getting them out in the open, and even though it can suck in the moment, it leads to some really great things.
Yeah, there has never been a time where I've regretted communicating frustrations. Ever. So, yeah, I've regretted maybe the way I've communicated it or displayed it, but but it always has led to a good conclusion with enough work.
Beautiful. All right. Easy, concise. Hopefully somebody goes out and has a tough conversation today. That's the homework. If there's something under the surface that you have not addressed, try to address it. this week and do it in a way where you can find the outcome for both parties, and do it in a non-confrontational way if you can. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Hopefully you learned something. We will see you next on episode 12, which is going to be something that we figure out later.
Yo!
Yo!